So thanks for joining us today. My name is Johnny Finnessy. I'm the content manager at Levelset. And I'm joined here today with our speaker, Amy Powell, also known as the girl in the hard hat and the founder of WellWorks, who provides leadership training for construction businesses. So I'll let her introduce herself in a moment, but first I just want to quickly go through our agenda today, which, if my computer cooperates. Today we're talking about submittals. So Amy's going to walk through the submittals process from start to finish, cover some common problems and mistakes that cause delays, why you should be improving this process on a continual basis, and how to take your submittals to the next level. And we'll talk about a few ways that submittals affects your payment process and your ability to actually get paid for the work you do. If you have any questions throughout this webinar, feel free to use the chat function or the Q&A. We'll cover those questions at the end of this webinar. So first, a little bit of background on Levelset. For those of you who aren't familiar with us, Levelset helps contractors and suppliers get paid faster and reduce the stress of managing their payment paperwork. So we publish payment data on contractor profiles. We have thousands of contractors across the country. That helps with pre-qualification before you sign a contract and helps you spot payment problems with your customers before they actually affect you. We also have a great community of national construction lawyers and payment experts who are standing by to answer any questions you have about lien laws, payment problems you have, anything like that. So let me turn it over to Amy.
Awesome. Thank you, Johnny. Thank you, Levelset, for what you do for our industry. It's very important. So who is WellWorks? We are leadership training built for construction. Again, I'm Amy Powell. I'm also the girl in the hard hat, which is a YouTube channel. And both of these are really geared towards the people in our industry, our greatest asset, actually. So we kind of hit on those top industry challenges and work with the people. Since we don't ever get people skills, we always seem to get processes and procedure skills, but never those people skills of how to deal with conflicts, approaching and resolving difficult conversations and conflicts. So that's what we're here to do in the construction industry. So we'll talk about submittals today. Johnny, if you could go to the next slide. Awesome.
Yeah, let's go.
Yeah, and a quick background. So I was with a general contractor for 13 years, with a mechanical contractor for 2 years, and with a high-end residential for 2 years. So I've been in the industry for quite a while, and from the general contracting standpoint. So all of the submittal process today will be brought to you from what our perspective is and our viewpoint as a general contractor. In this entire process. So this is the quick process we're going to go through, but I'll just have you go right to the next slide, Johnny, because we're going to get right into it. So as soon as we get informed that we have won a project, we then inform our subcontractors and suppliers that we have won it, and then send out LOIs if you won the bid or if you're going to be working on the project. LOIs are letter of intent. And so our intent with this is to get you going on your submittals, and that we're going to start the contract process. We got to draft it. We got to make sure the exclusions and inclusions are all set up properly. While this is happening, when that is sent to you saying, hey, can you start your submittals? Because we got to get this going early on in the project. We are building a submittal log based on the specifications and the drawings, because that's where you can find all the information about what we are required as a team to submit to the ownership group on products, on these submittals and drawings. So you may get a call during this process asking for fabrication or detailing time, but also lead times and delivery challenges. If there's holdups in the factory, if there's a manufacturing defect or they're backed up, whatever. That information is very helpful, one, in getting your contract dates correct, but also the schedule and making sure when do we have to have submittals in, when do we have to have them back, and when do we have to get them back to you to get going so that we stay on schedule and we're all on time as a project. All right, next slide, thank you. All right, so at this point, when you get that LOI, the subs and the suppliers are creating their submittals. Some of them are drafting, some of them are designing, some of them are shop drawings. But some of them are just, the majority of them are just product data sheets, samples and certificates. Certificates being like weld certificates. With this, there's also the substitution requests. And so substitution requests are when we are submitting on something outside of the specified manufacturer in the specifications. And so this can mean, where it will say I have a certain brand or a certain manufacturer, and then it says, or approved alternate. This is our invitation to submit something different or better based on our experience and our knowledge. But we do typically need a substitution request with that. And this entire process can typically be found in Division 1 and sometimes even a form. The tricky part about substitution requests is if you bid on something that's lower cost than what was actually specified, then that is your risk. If it's not approved by the architect and they say, nope, you gotta provide this, and it winds up being more money, that's your cost, that's your risk. So trying to get that approved earlier, or just making sure that whatever was bid is specified, that's important. In addition to this, we have to be able to justify why it is of equal or better value than what's actually specified. And again, that's the tricky part. If it's a lower cost, that cost typically is required to be then transferred. That difference is then required to be transferred over to the architect or the owner. They're expecting that money back. But again, equal or greater value, that value is a very loose term because what is value? And that's determined by the architect and the owner. Value could mean the quality. It could mean cost. It could mean time to get the material. It could mean environmental aspects, whatever. So just be careful with those substitution requests. Those are our biggest challenge in the submittal process. But once we get those from you, we then, as the general contractor, are reviewing it for compliance. This typically takes anywhere from 1 to 5 days, depending on how much information it is. And if it looks good enough, there's a few questions or there's a few changes, then we'll send that on. If it's completely wrong, we'll send it back to you and say, sorry, try again. We won't even send it on to the architect. All right, next slide, please, Johnny. Thank you. All right, so the submittal review. So now it's in the architect, the consultants, and sometimes the owner's hands. Determines who we send it to based on early on the project. We ask who wants to see these, who needs to review them. They typically get 10 working days. That's 2 weeks. That's a large amount of time. It might be fine if it's paint at the end of the project and there's no lead time. But if there's a lead time and it's going to affect our schedule, we've determined this as a team, we need to be aware of that so that we can communicate it to the architect or the consultant, asking them to make it a priority or asking them to expedite that. So then we can get it back and get stuff going and stay on schedule. So once it's returned to us, we quickly just send it right back to you. That typically takes a day. It's just whenever we could get to our email quick enough. But they are returned as approved as noted, or make corrections noted. That typically means you're good, make changes, but still go. Keep moving forward. It's rejected or revise and resubmit. We got to start that entire process over, and it can take up to 2 weeks again. You can see the time commitment on this. So really spending the time, this is a part of the quality process. Really spending that time to make sure that those submittals are quality is very important. All right, next slide. All right, and then again, get to work, or please get to work, as I would say. But if the submittals are approved, we can start ordering materials. We could start manufacturing. We could start, whenever the schedule permits, we can start installing. That communication with the superintendent is pretty important at that part to gauge when does he need the material, when does she want the material, is there room on site for the material, and just starting that coordination process. Am I good to go? Perfect. Let's do this. Let's go. All right, next slide. So common submittal mistakes. Poor lead time and scheduling. It's not as much lead time and scheduling as it is getting your submittals in early. I don't care if you are the marker board supplier at the very end of the project. We try to get all of the submittals in at the very beginning of the project to get it out of the way so we don't have that unforeseen, unknown, how long is this going to take? Give the architect as much time to make a different decision and options as possible. So we want those decisions. We want to get that out of the way so that when we're ready to order, we can order it. It gets there on site. It gets installed on site on time. Not clearly identifying what will be used. So within product data, I typically see this with metal studs. There's just lists and lists of different gauges. What do you plan to use? Typically, there's a certain gauge at door frames. Sometimes it's different on the exterior than the interior. So just circling or highlighting which ones you're using based on what is specified, that's a very important piece. What the huge list of different things, which one are you using on this site? That is the biggest thing that we see that's missing. Using unapproved substitutions, again, kind of went through the substitution process, but using a material that has not been approved officially by the architect, that can result in some major charges and rework, tearing out drywall to get to mechanical insulation because it wasn't correctly, it wasn't installed per the specifications, whatever. So being very transparent in those substitutions is important. Proceeding without submittals, this one gets sketchy. I really don't like to do this. Sometimes it happens, but it takes a lot of communication, documentation, and agreement between the teammates of the GC and then the supplier, the subcontractor. This doesn't happen very often. I really do not like to do this. I'd really strongly just push the approval of the submittals more than anything. There's something called submittals parties where everybody just comes and reviews it in one day just to get it out to everybody. So it can happen. It's out there, it exists. And then the last part is the closeout documents. This isn't typically thought of as a submittal, but it is still a submittal. It's just at the end of the project. But not getting these closeout documents, we don't get paid if we don't have these closeout documents. So if you're holding this up, we won't get paid. We can't get you finally paid. So when you see that first request or even send it in within 3 months of the end of the project, just get it in quickly. Just get it done, and then it's out of the way as well. All right, Johnny, I think you're up.
Cool. So I just wanted to cover a few of the ways that submittals intersect with the payment process. Obviously, any schedule or job site delay can have an impact on your bottom line and your cash flow. So there's a few ways that submittals affects your right to get paid and the timing of your payments. So we'll just go through a few of those. Your billing deadlines, obviously the submittals process is part of your contract. So it's really important to read your contract in full at the beginning before you even start any work on the job to understand what your contract says, especially when it comes to the submittals process. In some contracts, your billing deadline will be based on the approval of your submittal. Sometimes suppliers won't be able to bill until the submittal is actually approved. So any delay in that submittals process can delay your payments and hurt your cash flow. Change orders. If you had a submittal that was approved, but then the architect or the owner changes the specs, or you get to the job site and the site conditions are different than what was in the contract, it's so important to get a change order for anything that's outside of the scope of work that was in your original contract. If you have to create a new submittal based on those spec changes, submit a change order, get it in writing before you actually do any of the work to create that submittal or order the materials.
Absolutely. And Johnny, with that, there's sometimes the architect or the engineer will actually request something completely different in the submittals and then expect to just go without changing the actual contract documents. That is also a trigger to, no, you need a change order for that. It needs to be through an ASI or an RFI or a spec change, whatever it is. The submittal process is not a time to make contract document changes from the architect and owner standpoint down to the subcontractors and suppliers.
So essentially, if anything that is not in your contract originally that's going to affect your cost or the schedule needs to have a signed change order to go with it. Yeah. And then, especially for subcontractors and suppliers, anyone that doesn't have a contract directly with the GC, don't assume that just because your company's name is on the submittal that the GC knows who you are, what materials you're providing, what work you're doing. It's so important, even for subs that have a contract with the GC, to introduce yourself with a preliminary notice, sometimes called a notice to owner or a prelim or a pre-lien. These documents, number one, help to protect your lien rights, but even more important than that, they open a line of communication that lets the GC know you're on the job and expect to be paid for the work you're doing.
Yes, please. We don't. The stuff is going through. Sometimes they're not actual suppliers. They're just a copy and paste on the product data. So we would like to know that you're there. And sometimes we don't get that information. We even ask our superintendents sometimes to look for the delivery trucks and make a list on their daily logs so we can keep an eye on who is working, who is part of our team here. We need to make sure that you're seen. So showing that you're here on the job site is very helpful.
Because GCs want everyone to get paid. You want to avoid payment problems too.
Please.
And then, your lien rights are the most powerful payment tool in a contractor supplier's tool belt. And so protecting your lien rights is really important throughout every project. But your lien rights, they're not, because they're governed by separate laws, they're not directly influenced by the submittal process. The submittal process doesn't generally affect your lien rights or the deadlines to file. But there are two specific scenarios that can come up with submittals. Number one, custom material fabricators typically would submit, the shop drawings for the custom materials that they're providing to a project. And in some cases, after they create that material, and the specs might change on the project, or the site conditions are different, and that material doesn't fit. Maybe it's not actually incorporated into the project at the end. In a lot of states, custom material fabricators still have the right to file a lien, even if that material wasn't incorporated into the project. And that's so important. The second is, a lot of states, their lien laws actually protect design work as well. So architects, engineers, and designers are also protected under lien laws in many cases. So even the work, typically mechanics lien laws protect your right to payment for permanent improvements to property, whether through labor or materials. But in a lot of cases, the design work is actually protected as well. So if you go through all of this work to, create shop drawings or samples or mock-ups, you have, in many cases, you have a right to file a lien if you don't get paid for that design work. So those are two specific scenarios in which the submittal process is really affected, or really affects your mechanics lien rights. And then the last is just, on every project, having a very clear process for documentation. Your submittals, if there's ever a dispute over payments or workmanship, or your payment isn't coming in and the GC disputes it, or the owner disputes it, the person with the best documentation is going to win. We like to say, you don't get paid for the work you do, you get paid for the work you can prove. And so keeping a detailed record of all of the submittals, whether they were approved, whether they were rejected, what that process was like, and the dates, whether you're tracking in a spreadsheet or using software to do that, it's so critical for your payments at the end of the day. So we just want to go through a couple of common questions before we open it up to your questions. This first one was, if I don't have a contract with the GC directly, is there anything specific I should do during the submittal phase of the project?
And Jenny, I think the biggest thing is just somehow letting you know, don't assume that the supplier or the subcontractor that we are contracted with is informing us. It may be unintentional, right? Everybody knows how busy our lives are at this point, but it wouldn't hurt to just say, hey, just figured I'd let you know I'm here. I'm gonna be on your job too. So just getting notice, that helps.
So that communication.
Yes.
Communication is super important. So these three were all very related. When can I bill? Does my material have to be on site to be billed? And can I bill for materials that are stored at my shop or in my yard?
When you can bill is it depends, right? If you have detailing, if you're a fire alarm, if you're a fire sprinkler, and you've got those design costs, then you're probably going to be billing sooner than, again, like the painter, when they're going to get the paint. But material to be on site to be billed, not necessarily, but look at your contract documents, look at the specifications. Sometimes there's not room on a job site to then be billed. So you have to, store it at your site or at the yard. If that's the case, again, look at Division 1. Typically you need You need proof of insurance. You need pictures. You need a bill of sale. There's certain things that we need to where we can bill and then get paid and then pay you. But look at what's required from the architect and the owner from that on if you can bill for offsite materials or not.
And then can I assume that as soon as I get my return submittal that I should order my materials right away?
This is very tough. My recommendation is call the superintendent and ask, because there's some, again, do you have storage space? Is the site ready for you? Would the materials get damaged if they're stored on site because there's everything going on or there's just not much room? The best thing you can do is just communicate, ask the superintendent. Contractually, yes, but that doesn't necessarily mean that we are completely ready for you on site yet. So communication with the superintendent or with the foreman or whoever the GC representative on site is very important.
Great. If you have any other questions, feel free to put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A. Amy's had a lot of experience with submittals and probably has an answer ready to go for any questions that you have about the submittals process, how to get paid.
Submittals are
questions.
Definitely one of those areas that you never are taught and you have to learn by fire. So trial by fire, the things you learn from submittals at a very young age it's impressive for sure.
Well, if you do have any other questions, feel free to email Amy at apowell@livingwellworks.org, or you can email me with any payment questions, any questions about mechanics lien laws, preliminary notices at johnny.finity@levelset.com. We'll still stay on the line for a couple minutes if you guys have any questions. Kim Mashera asked, is it typical to be able to file lien for service work after the job is completed? So typically, your lien rights, as long as you've followed your state law and protected your right to file a lien, for any material suppliers or contractors or subcontractors, they will typically, the deadline to file a lien will be different in each state and is typically based on the last date of furnishing labor or materials. So your deadline to file a lien for the work, the bottom line is that you have a right protected by law to get paid for the work you do or the materials you provide. And in every state, there's some steps that you have to follow, like sending notice within a certain deadline. But as long as you've followed that steps and the work that you've done is covered under your state's lien law, then absolutely after the job is completed, and if you are not paid for any or part of that work, you can file a lien under your state's lien law. And those email addresses, again, for those of you that are on the phones, Amy's email is apowell@livingwellworks.org. And my email is johnny.finity@levelset.com. Great. Well, thank you so much to everybody that joined. Thank you so much to Amy for sharing your knowledge. Everybody go check out the Girl in the Hardhat YouTube channel. Amy makes some really fun videos that I'm sure you will get a kick out of. Thanks again to everybody that joined. Have a great day.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for all that you do.